This week, spring is in the air, and so is a renewed call for justice, peace, and freedom. But before we get to the front lines, let's take a look at what it means to be an activist and what makes a social movement successful. Next up, on the front lines, Code Pink wants you to stand up against the military-industrial complex, and more precisely this time, against the Saudi regime and the lobbying group AIPAC. And finally, we can't all live off the grid, but we can all make changes that loosen our strong ties to a consumerist, overly commodified lifestyle. But first, I just gotta riff this right now. Get this out because it's digging in, too deep and the hills too steep to climb once I find my foothold. My soul already slides. Now this. Sprinted down my spine in time with the rhythm in my mind, the beat that my feet could and did grind. In the dirt, the streets, whose streets are streets, the sweep of the sweet unutterable dream, the unmentionable, unquenchable lust to live, to be alive. Yes, to be alive. I respond, therefore I am. The philosopher wrote, and here I am with scribbled lines down my arm that feed my mind, trickle down my spine in time, with the rhythm and the beat that I grind, the kind that makes you feel alive. Full circle, here we are at the beginning. Let's begin. I'm paying a debt for cash never spent, breathing the filth that I never spilled, the hushed screaming whispers of shadows and alleyways, where prophets do draw the words of our fall on piss-stained and smog-ridden walls, the canvas of cities we built to sprawl, over paradise lost at the cost that we'd always go digging for what we're now missing, a blue sky, a green field, a place to just breathe, And there, a trash heap of found art meeting its maker, a natural wonder for sale. Any takers? The king of the graveyard digs a bit deeper, happy to make that slope that much steeper. Narcissus and Gucci, Chanel, you've done well. The mirror applauds your short-sighted cause, wraps your doubt in a rose-colored gauze. The extortion contorting to fit fluid morals, the capitalist branding pushing for more of everything. Meanwhile, in those dark alleyways somewhere, your prophet sits. That child left behind, lost in space-time, the Medicaid line, somewhere hungry, dumbed down and out of time. Somewhere your paradise lies, guarded by truth, that we traded our blue skies to bury and hide. Made in the US of A, manufactured consent mixed with truth now blooms, a manufactured dissent we can use. On those smog-ridden walls, a manifesto for all. In the streets, our rise is corruption's pitfall, and the riots we make are hope, not mistakes. The riot that should be shamed is our silence. Violence against justice's name. Silence is violence, and we're pushing peace. The quiet cocoon to have no room, to stay low and out of this all-too-reality show. We're alive, so act like it. Why fight the light when the darkness still grows? Why hate on truth when the lies are killing your mind and raping your soul? Bring it home. These words sprint down my spine, leave me breathless, and yet they're my life, lying to the hope shaping new worlds outside, the clash of the good fight with evil on high. The lowly on high roads won't stoop or connive to live off oppression for honorable mentions, a six-figure pension. No, there is no question that we in this hole are digging for gold that we'll never hold, an American dream that's already sold. Scream if you hear this now. Raise your fist high if we see eye to eye, because I know you can feel this. In time, with the rhythm in mind, the beat that my feet could and did grind in the dirt, the streets. Whose streets? Our streets. The sweep of the sweet unutterable dream, the unmentionable, unquenchable lust to live. To be alive. Yes, I, you, respond. Therefore we are people, free, activists, we do something. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Spring is upon us. It's raining, that's why we're inside. And with the warmer weather comes a renewed push from many movements shaking off the cold rigidity of winter and rising once again, like an unstoppable wave of people power. From tweets to marching in the streets. Our streets. Now, if you've watched this show before, you are probably no stranger to the idea, the concept of activism. But even for the old experts out there, it can be nice at times to glance at a roadmap of sorts, a guide for the activists navigating their social movements in and around the flood of corruption and greed. So, grab a cup of tea, coffee, a cozy corner, and let's talk activism. Bill Moyer, not to be confused with Bill Moyers, former White House press secretary and host of The Bill Moyers Show, a fantastic interview and analysis show. Also not to be confused with Bill Moyer, head of Backbone Campaign, a badass grassroots creative activism organization that does everything from block shell oil rigs to project messages of dissent and change and much, much more. No, this is in fact a third badass Bill Moyer, activist, principal organizer in the 1966 Chicago open housing movement, along with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the author of the Movement Action Plan, a blueprint for social change that's been translated into dozens of languages and used by thousands of activists. The map, as it's called, is broken up into 8 stages of successful social movements, from business as usual, to a trigger event, to a movement taking off, to the perception of failure, to majority public awareness and interest, to success and the road ahead. The map is therefore not just a map, if you will, but also a warning and an encouragement. Take, for example, the perception of failure that haunts any movement as it really begins to gain not only public support, but therefore serious pushback from the powers that be. This time of perceived failure is something that all movements go through, oftentimes in waves. As one battle is won or lost, another waged. Activists are encouraged to move past this, to see past the fog of propaganda thrown to delegitimize their work, to move past that moment of doubt and press onwards. The map encourages activists to focus. Focus on informing and engaging the people so that we can all take hold of our power, the people's power. Indeed, Moyer notes in his introduction to MAP that activists often hold 2 conflicting models of power, the power elite and people power. The former is, of course, the idea that because the power elite hold the power, we must look to them for change. We have to appeal to their reason, their morals, use their channels and institutions, like lobbying, Congress, voting, etc. The latter idea, that we the people hold the power and the power elite are only the power elite because we let them be. This model of power, Moyer says, is the model of social movements. He writes, people power is the model used by social movements. The movement strategy is not only to use normal channels in an effort to persuade power holders, such as President Reagan, to change their minds, but also to alert, educate, and mobilize a discontented, impassioned, and determined grassroots population using nonviolent means beyond the normal parliamentary methods and institutions. It is important to note here that he says not only use, but also. As in, yes, we will still work in the channels of the power elite, but fuck if that's where we'll place all of our full hope in change. Keep in mind, for example, our current commander-in-chief won more than 51% of the popular vote twice in a row. Imagine what he would have lost by had more people been awake, had more people voted for a third party, had there been more activist candidates running. And this is key. As part of a larger concept of getting activists into office, into the system, like we've seen with Shama Sawant in Seattle and like we talked about last week with Daniel Lee in Culver City, it's important to vote, particularly locally, to bug the shit out of your members of Congress, to show up at their doors, and seriously, to not fucking re-elect them when they do stupid shit. Reminder here, 88% of Congress is up for election, so get on that. That being said, overwhelmingly, we need to see the power as in our hands. We need to dispel the idea that we are constituents only, and that our path to justice and freedom lies only in the path paved by those paid to oppress us. Like Melina Abdullah, professor of Pan-African Studies and organizer with Black Lives Matter, said on Democracy Now! Last week, when she was asked why Black Lives Matter has not endorsed any candidate in the 2016 elections, we know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are built to entrench themselves. So no matter what the candidates attempt to do, being controlled by the two-party system is hugely problematic and is disempowering and oppressive to Black people. We need to break away from this notion that the only way of being democratic is engaging in electoral politics. And we're not telling people not to vote. We're simply not endorsing any presidential candidate, recognizing that where we want to put our time and energy is in the development of people to act in their own interest and on their own behalf. So we are pushing the real revolution. We know that the revolution won't come at the ballot box, and the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will be on the ground when the people rise up and demand something better, something more imaginative, and something more visionary. Boom. That pretty much says it. This acknowledgement of electoral politics combined with the powerful statement that we, the people, will not bow to this two-party theocracy made in the name of the Holy Father Dollar is just spot on. It's so right and so eloquently put and so inspiring. The focus on building up movements, building up the power of the people, recognizing the systemic path and using it when it serves the movement, but not waiting for it to serve the movement. In other words, creating activists, not acquiescents. And speaking of creating activists, let's jump cozy cues to a sister pamphlet of the map, The 4 Roles of an Activist. If you want to read more about Moyer's map, we will post our source in the show description and at the end of the show. But, you know, that you can also always... The 4 Roles of Activists, as explained by social activist Bill Moyer. Activists need to be seen as responsible citizens in order to win respect, acceptance, and legitimacy from the majority of ordinary citizens who must be won over for movements to succeed. Effective citizens say yes to society's core values, assuming that these are morally acceptable, and activists must also be rebels who say aloud no to social conditions and public policies that violate these values. It's not enough, however, to protest. Activists also need to be social change agents who work to educate and involve the general public to oppose present policies and seek positive, constructive solutions. Finally, they must be reformers who work with the official political and judicial structures to get solutions incorporated into laws and governmental policies and accepted as the conventional wisdom of the day. There you have it. Citizen, rebel, agent, and reformer, which just sounds like the most awesome collection of words to put on a business card, doesn't it? And you should. You totally should. Moyer goes into more depth as to what each of these roles mean and examples of how they fit into the movement. And once again, you can find a link to that at the end of the show, or of course, you can Google that shit. But now that we've gotten a fresh, organized, and inspiring perspective on what it means to be an activist, let's hear from some of my personal favorite activists, Code Pink. Code Pink, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is an activist organization focused primarily on peace and anti-war efforts, targeting the military-industrial complex with pointedly pink precision and no bullshit, straightforward creative activism and lobbying. In effect, that wonderful combination of building people power while working outside and within the system for change. Last week, Code Pink kicked off their new campaign targeting Saudi Arabia, essentially calling them out for gross human rights violations and trigger-happy terrorism, whether that be bankrolling or supplying arms to terrorists in the region, or their very own bombing campaigns in Yemen or the violent suppression of dissent in Saudi Arabia or neighboring countries like Bahrain. Unilateral acts of war, war crimes, human rights violations, in a lot of ways they're just like us. Which is probably why our governments get along so well. Saudi Arabia is our closest ally in the region, along with Israel. And in exchange for their luscious black gold, we not only let them get away with murder, we help them. And Code Pink thinks that this is just bullshit. So they put together this video as an invitation to do something about it, combining the voices of journalists, human rights activists, Middle East experts, and Saudi citizens, for example like Mohammed al-Nimr, the son of Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, a prominent pro-democracy activist murdered by the Saudi government in 2011, and an unnamed Saudi woman who wouldn't show her face for fear of retaliation against her family if the Saudi government found out about her dissent. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Medea Benjamin with the peace group Code Pink, and we're excited to announce a new international campaign to stop weapons sales to Saudi Arabia.
I'm Sanjeev Berry with Amnesty International USA. Join us as we work to end U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia. It's time for the U.S. government to stop selling bombs and other weapons that the Saudi Arabian government is using to cut the lives short of people next door in Yemen and to repress human rights at home.
I'm from Saudi Arabia and I'm afraid to show my face in this video because the Saudi regime may go after me and my family. I'm speaking out for all the oppressed women and minorities whose voices cannot be heard.
Washington likes to talk about Saudi Arabia as one of our most important allies in the Arab world, in the Middle East, in the world. What they really are is the best ally of the arms dealers. That's why we have to be challenging what Saudi Arabia's government has come to represent.
I'm Matar, Ibrahim Matar, former MP from Bahrain. During the uprising of Bahrain, I was arrested. It was a very tough period for me and for a lot of Bahrainis who were facing systematic torture and a lot of widespread violation for human rights. It's the time for US to stop depending on dictators to maintain their interest in the region.
My name is Muhammad Al-Nimr. I'm the son of the martyr, Sheikh Nimr Al-Nimr. My father was killed by the Saudi government. I'm here to participate in this conference to show the people what kind of danger are they in if they are dealing with this government. They are putting so much money to destabilize the region so they can gain more influence, and they're using the Wahhabi ideology to kill people, and it's not part of Islam.
Join us to support the human rights activists in Saudi Arabia.
As we look at the turmoil in the Middle East and we see things getting worse and worse each day, there's one country most responsible for the spread of extremism, and that is Saudi Arabia. It's high time that we focus on it, we look at the cozy U.S.-Saudi relationship, and we do something about it, which is stop sending them weapons.
To get involved with Code Pink's campaign against Saudi Arabia and our close ties with the oppressive regime, go to codepink.org/Saudi Arabia. Also, if you're in the DC area on Monday the 21st, Code Pink will be raising their voices against AIPAC, protesting the organization's support of Israeli apartheid and their bold lobbying for military interventionism and billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. As Code Pink writes on the event page, while American communities are struggling with slashed budgets for schools and resources such as safe water, AIPAC demands billions of U.S. tax dollars for Israel's brutal occupation of Palestine. Israel's current $3 billion annual military aid package is set to expire in 2017, and Israel is asking for an extension and increase to $5 billion annually for the next 10 years. Rather than allowing AIPAC to demand more and more money for Israeli systems of apartheid, oppression, military occupation, and massacres, we say it's time to disarm AIPAC. Join us. And if you can't join the event on the ground, join online with #DisarmAIPAC. We will post a link to the event on our Facebook page, but you can also find it through Code Pink's Facebook page at the URL below. Now then, from the front lines to off the grid, Wendy Tremaine left a successful and high-priced lifestyle in New York City to settle down in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. No, really, that's what it's called. Once there, her and her husband have built, invented, foraged, and grown all that they need, being careful to not buy anything new and living life in what she calls the waste stream of an over-commodified, over-consumerized world. In 2013, she piled some of her experiences into a book called The Good Life Lab: Radical Experiments in Hands-on Living. Here she shares her geographical, emotional, and mental journey while blending in some beautiful illustrations and DIY how-tos on everything from biofuel to beer. We sat down with Wendy a while back to discuss not only her book, but her decision to make this huge shift and how others can make small shifts and start embracing a life less commodified. Take a look.
I often wondered about, well, where are all the remote workers? When are we going to move to rural America and live out this dream that the internet made possible? It's funny that we're still not doing it because the waste stream is so abundant that you don't have to be, in downtown Manhattan anymore or in Oakland. And in fact, when you get outside a little bit, what you tend to bump into are the people who make the things. and the economy changes a bit. It's more like in a small town or a rural place, it's a social network of economy. So, like the last thing you would do is use money because it's like the low road. It means you don't have a relationship, So it's just as rich, if not richer. But essentially, I think one of the biggest exchanges is you're time rich and money poor. I mean, economically, my bank account, I looked a lot richer in New York, right? But I'm so much wealthier now.
But why do you think people are resisting, this idea of moving out to places and becoming rich in other ways? Even when you hear people in big cities, I lived in LA for 10 years and it was like, if I could just get out of the city for a while, that'd be really nice. But they don't. What do you think is stopping people from actually doing it like you did?
I think it depends a little bit on age, but I think especially when you're younger, you feel like you're missing something. When I left New York, I was 37 and I did everything. I was in a rock band, I ran a record label, I was in the music entertainment business. Like I just did everything. I was corporate, but I like played by my rules, and I had a great time. And when I left, I felt like I knew exactly what I was leaving. And my excitement and growth and newness was all in this foreign rural place. So in some ways, I think you got to get it out of your system so you don't feel like I'm missing something. And maybe, it's just a little scary, economically, like how do you make money?
I'm curious as well, how do you, now that you've moved into this decommodified setting, how do you see the scale? Because there are some people that look at what you do and they're like, I'm not ready for that because I'm still enjoying New York City or whatever. Or they're not sure how to take that first step. What would you suggest, and how do you see that scale as trying to take that first step versus going all the way to truth and consequences?
Well, not everybody has to leave the city, right? Like, for me, it was important because I wanted to live a hands-on life, right? I mean, wherever we're standing, we can sort of carve out a decommodified or autonomous space, where you just say within this domain, I'm going to have a new level of integrity. So whether it's, just wearing used stuff or, sometimes it's like just refusing to care about money for me, like I teach yoga in town here and, people throw the weirdest stuff at me like barters and how about this, and I'll pay you 3 cents. And some people think I'm crazy, but I just say yes to everything pretty much because I feel like in the end, there's like an emotional lesson going on here that's like bigger than the dollar. And for me, it keeps me from ever getting that like anxious, that tension that like wants to leap out and grab money, I mean, for me, that's the death trap. So I don't have to live in the middle of the desert to practice this kind of stuff, or to take control over the food I eat and refuse to be poisoned by industry,
Do you see this? A lot of activists say that, the future of this system, because the system will eventually break down because you can't extract forever. So as it breaks down, do you see more and more people, whether they're in the city or out in the sticks, so to speak, do you see more people switching towards this sort of like barter economy? Like, what can I give you for that, bushel of kale, as opposed to like, oh, it's just this much money?
I don't know, I think of the cliche, like this is the best day on earth, this is the worst day on earth, like, and it's always been that. It's hard to tell if it's where I'm looking or if it's what's happening. I still hold out faith in our intellectual communities, in our activist communities. My partner and I were just talking the other day. We live around a lot of like what were ranchers. And there's a little tension where we are between the ranchers and the newer creative people who come here. And, you have to like step back and realize the ranchers were like the salt of the earth, the close to the ground. They had that taken away and nothing replaced it. They can't make a living any longer doing these things that they had pride in and that kept them close to nature. And, there's a reason for the way that pride developed into these sort of blown out psyche, personalities. And in a sense, the answer to get us all back to the same place is the same. You know, they would like micro, local, organic farming. They would get their quality of life back, right? And we wouldn't seem so different in view all of a sudden. And then the liberal progressives would get their organic food, and it wouldn't seem like entitlement. It would just seem like a match. And I think it's a real fertile ground for people to both learn to collectivize and make new economies, learn to reskill and actually live, and then also just get this clearer view of like reality. You know, like reality is messy and it goes up and down, and you don't have a job or a 9 to 5 clock, so you're just kind of like, wow, and you have to kind of reconcile all these habits and things and training, right? And it's real, and it makes it really interesting. And I think at the end of the day, it's like more important that we like live a real life than that we feel good. You know, it's more stimulating to just like live. So yeah, that's my pitch for inexpensive rural America.
Wendy's shift and comments on living so locally remind me of a Hedges quote from his latest book, Wages of Rebellion. Communities and communal organizations that manage to break free from the dominant culture will find a correlation between the amount of freedom they enjoy and the amount of independence they attain in a world where access to land, food, and water has become paramount. Such communities are our best hope for sustaining the intellectual and artistic traditions that define the heights of human culture and permit the common good. Yet another call to local focus and community care, while still acting on the global stage by defying capitalism and fighting for justice, freedom, and peace. If you're interested in hearing more about Wendy's move and perhaps learning how to make your own beer or biofuel, you can find her book on Amazon, or indeed perhaps somewhere in the waste stream. And that, revolutionaries, does it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As usual, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in this week's show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From the rainy Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.